I never really thought much about the dark web. You know, it's one of those things people talk about like it's some forbidden playground where the world's darkest secrets are just hanging out. For me, it was more of a curiosity than anything else, a stupid itch I wanted to scratch. But what started as a late-night boredom-fueled idea turned into the most messed-up experience of my life. It all started a few weeks ago. I was up late, scrolling Reddit like usual, falling down those weird rabbit holes you get stuck in when it's past midnight. I came across a post in one of those tech forums about accessing the dark web. The guy made it sound so casual, like it was no big deal. He even shared a step-by-step guide on how to use Tor and browse safely. I should have stopped there. I mean, I wasn't exactly a tech genius, and I knew this stuff came with risks. But that weird, stupid part of my brain that gets off on curiosity pushed me to try it out, so I downloaded Tor, set up a VPN, and dove in. The first few sites I visited were pretty underwhelming. Forums, marketplaces, and a ton of scammy-looking stuff. Nothing screamed illegal horrors like people always say. It was honestly kind of boring. Then I found a site called The Mirror Room. It didn't look flashy or anything. It was just a plain black page with a single sentence in white text. What scares you the most? Below it was a prompt where you could type your answer. I figured it was some kind of creepy survey or ARG, so I played along. I typed, "being watched." Immediately the page refreshed and a download started. I panicked for a second, thinking I'd just infected my laptop with some virus, but the file was just a text document. It was titled instructions.txt. I know, I should have stopped there, deleted it, wiped my laptop, and never looked back. But instead, I opened it. The file had one sentence: put your address in the box to see what scares you the most. I froze. No way in hell was I putting my address in there. That's how people end up in horror movies, right? I closed the window and shut everything down. That should have been the end of it, but I swear that sentence stuck with me. The dark web is supposed to be anonymous, right? Nobody would know it was my address unless I gave it to them. That's how I rationalized it to myself anyway. The next night, I went back. I typed my address. A message popped up instantly. "You will receive confirmation shortly." That was it. No follow-up, no creepy animations, nothing. It was anticlimactic as hell. I went to bed that night, feeling more annoyed than scared. But when I woke up the next morning, everything changed. I live in a small apartment by myself. My building's not the greatest, but it's quiet, and the neighbors mostly keep to themselves. When I left for work that morning, I noticed a plain white envelope stuck to my door. No stamp, no writing, just blank. I thought it was a flyer or some junk, so I didn't open it right away. When I got to my car, I ripped it open. Inside was a single piece of paper with a photo printed on it. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at, but when it hit me, I nearly threw up. It was a picture of me lying in my bed, asleep. My stomach dropped. I looked around the parking lot, half expecting to see someone watching me, but there was no one there. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. The photo wasn't blurry or grainy. It was clear, like it had been taken up close. I could see the way my blanket was half off the bed and the pile of laundry I'd left on the floor. Someone had been in my apartment. I didn't go to work that day. I drove straight to a coffee shop, parked in the corner booth, and tried to think. My first instinct was to call the cops, but what was I supposed to say? "Hi, someone sent me a creepy photo of myself sleeping?" That'd go nowhere. Plus, I'd been on the dark web the night before, and I didn't want to explain that part. Instead, I went back to my apartment. I checked every window and door, every corner of every room, looking for signs of a break-in. Nothing. Everything was locked, just like I'd left it. Even my laptop was untouched. But that night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump. I left all the lights on and stayed in the living room with a baseball bat, waiting for something to happen. At around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message said, "Did you like the picture?" I didn't reply. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to explode. A few minutes later, another text came through. "You shouldn't leave your window unlocked." That was it. I grabbed my keys, ran out of the apartment, and didn't look back. I drove to a cheap motel on the other side of town and stayed there for the rest of the night. The next day, I went back to my apartment to grab a few things. I didn't plan on staying there anymore. But when I opened the door, I found another envelope on the floor. My blood ran cold. Inside was another picture. This time, it was a photo of me standing in the motel room I'd stayed in last night, staring out the window. That's when I realized I wasn't just being watched. They were following me. I don't think I've ever felt true fear until that moment. Holding that second picture, staring at my own reflection in the motel window, I realized something terrifying. Whoever this was, they weren't just watching me. They were ahead of me. Every move I made, they knew. Every place I went, they followed. I couldn't stop shaking. My hands felt like ice, and my legs were weak. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How had they gotten into the motel? I had locked the door. I checked it twice before going to sleep. And the photo, how could they take it without me noticing? I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but all I could do was stand there, frozen in the doorway of my apartment. My instincts were telling me to leave, to get as far away as possible, but where could I go? They'd already proven they could find me no matter where I was. That afternoon, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them scare me into hiding. I'd had enough. I was going to figure out who the hell was doing this and how they were tracking me. I packed up my laptop, grabbed a knife from the kitchen just in case, and drove to a different motel. A sketchy one. The kind of place where people mind their own business. I set up my laptop on the rickety motel desk and went back to the mirror room. The site was still there, still displaying that creepy question. What scares you the most? This time, I didn't type anything. I just stared at the screen, trying to figure out how this whole thing worked. Was the site some kind of trap? Were they using it to track people? And how the hell did they know I'd gone to that motel? None of it made sense. As I sat there, my phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number. "You can't hide forever." My stomach turned. I looked around the room, half expecting to see someone watching me through the window, but the curtains were drawn and the door was bolted shut. I picked up my phone and for the first time decided to reply. My message was simple. "Who are you?" I didn't expect a response, but within seconds another message came through. "Look outside." I froze. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me not to move, but I couldn't help it. I crept to the window, pulled back the curtain just a crack, and looked out into the parking lot. There was a car, a beat-up old sedan parked across the lot, facing my room. I couldn't see anyone inside, but the headlights were on, casting an eerie glow over the pavement. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I let the curtain fall back into place and grabbed the knife from the desk. The phone buzzed again. "Come outside. Let's talk." Hell no. I wasn't going anywhere near that car. Instead, I called the police. I didn't care if I sounded paranoid or crazy. This was way beyond anything I could handle on my own. While I waited for them to show up, I stayed crouched by the window, peeking out every few seconds to see if the car was still there. It didn't move. Just sat there, headlights on, like it was waiting. When the cops finally arrived, the car was gone. I told them everything, or at least as much as I could without mentioning the dark web. They checked the area, took my statement, and said they'd keep an eye out. But The way they looked at me, I could tell they didn't really believe me. To them, I was just some paranoid weirdo staying at a rundown motel. After they left, I felt even worse. Whoever was doing this, they knew how to disappear. They knew how to stay one step ahead, and they weren't going to stop. That night, I barely slept. Every noise outside sent me into a panic. By morning, I was exhausted, but I knew I couldn't stay in that motel. I needed a plan, something to protect myself, something to fight back. I decided to go back to my apartment. At least there, I had cameras. I'd never actually used the cheap security cameras I'd installed when I moved in. They were one of those budget sets you could buy online, and I'd mostly put them up for show, but now they felt like my only chance at figuring out what was going on. When I got to my apartment, everything was just as I'd left it, empty and quiet. No more envelopes, no signs of anyone breaking in. I spent the rest of the day setting up the cameras properly, making sure they covered every angle of the place, the front door, the windows, even my bedroom. If anyone came in, I'd know. That night, I locked every door, every window, and sat in the living room with the camera feed open on my laptop. Hours passed, and nothing happened. I started to think maybe they'd given up, that maybe the cops showing up had scared them off. But then, at exactly 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Another text. Smile for the camera. I looked at the laptop screen and my blood went cold. There was someone in my apartment, a figure dressed in all black, standing in the middle of my living room, staring straight at the camera. I didn't hear them come in. I didn't hear anything at all. They were just there, like they'd materialized out of thin air. And then they moved. Slowly, deliberately, they walked toward the camera, their face still hidden by the shadows. They leaned in close, so close I could see the glint of their eyes. And then they whispered something so soft I could barely make it out. "You're not safe." The screen went black. When the camera feed cut out, I nearly dropped my laptop. My entire body was trembling. Someone had been in my apartment right in front of me on that screen, and I didn't even hear them leave. I sat there, frozen, clutching the knife I kept nearby, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. But it wasn't in my head. The text, the camera feed, it was real. Someone was screwing with me, and they wanted me to know just how helpless I was. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the corner of my living room, knife in hand, waiting for something, anything to happen. But the hours dragged by, and nothing did. By morning, I was completely fried. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. Something had to give. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the cops. This time, I told them everything, including the part about the dark web. The officer I spoke to, a guy named Martinez, listened without interrupting. He didn't give me the condescending look the others had before. He asked questions, lots of them. What sites I'd visited, what information I'd shared, if I'd noticed anyone following me before all this started. When I told him about the photos, his face darkened. "You need to leave your apartment," he said flatly. "Stay somewhere safe. Don't go back until we figure this out." It was reassuring for about 5 seconds, until I remembered the photo from the motel. Whoever this was, they didn't care where I went. They'd find me. Martinez gave me his card and told me to call if anything else happened. But as soon as I got back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was another text, just 4 words. "Talking to the cops." My stomach turned. I looked around the parking lot, half expecting to see that beat-up sedan again, but the lot was empty. The text was followed by a second message, "Check your trunk." Every hair on my body stood on end. My car was parked just a few feet away, but it suddenly felt like miles. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I crept to the back of the car, my hand shaking as I reached for the trunk latch. When I opened it, I almost threw up. Inside was a pile of Polaroid photos, all of them of me. They were taken at different times, in different places. Me leaving my apartment, sitting in my car, walking into the coffee shop. Some of them were from weeks ago, long before I'd even touched the dark web. But the last photo was the worst. It was a picture of me, crouched by the window in the motel room the night before, staring out at the parking lot. It was taken from inside the room. I slammed the trunk shut and jumped back into the driver's seat, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. They'd been there, in the room with me, and I hadn't even known. I didn't know where to go or what to do, so I drove aimlessly for hours. Every car that passed me felt like a threat. Every shadow felt like it was hiding someone. When the sun started to set, I finally pulled into a 24-hour diner. It was crowded, well lit, and felt safe. For the first time all day, I started to relax, just a little. I ordered coffee and sat in a booth by the window, watching the parking lot. The waiter gave me a strange look when he handed me the mug, probably because I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks. I didn't care. I just needed to stay somewhere public, somewhere I wouldn't be alone. About an hour later, my phone buzzed again. My heart sank. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't ignore it. The message was a photo. This time, it wasn't of me. It was of the diner, taken from outside. The caption read, "Enjoying your coffee?" I bolted out of the booth, my heart racing. The diner was full of people, but none of them seemed out of place. I scanned the parking lot through the window, but there was no sign of anyone watching me. I ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and called Martinez. "They're here," I whispered. They sent me a picture of the diner. "Stay put," Martinez said. "We're sending someone now. Don't leave the building." I hung up and leaned against the sink, trying to calm myself down. My reflection in the mirror looked like a ghost, pale, sweaty, eyes wide with fear. I splashed water on my face and took deep breaths, but it didn't help. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message wasn't a photo, it was a video. With shaking hands, I opened it. The footage was grainy but clear enough to make out. It was me, sitting in the booth, drinking coffee. The camera was moving like it was being carried. Then the perspective shifted, focusing on the bathroom door. The video ended with a single frame of the door I was now standing behind. I dropped the phone. My mind was screaming at me to run, but where? Whoever this was, they were already inside. I grabbed the knife from my pocket and braced myself. For the next few minutes, there was nothing but silence. No footsteps, no knocks, nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing. Finally, there was a loud bang on the door. "Police!" a voice shouted. I opened the door, knife still in hand. 2 officers were standing there, including Martinez. They took one look at me and immediately stepped inside, guns drawn, but the bathroom was empty. Whoever had been following me was gone. Again. Martinez walked me out of the diner and put me in the back of a squad car. I was too shaken to argue. He said he'd take me somewhere safe, somewhere they could keep an eye on me. But as the car pulled out of the lot, I caught a glimpse of something in the rear-view mirror. A figure standing under the flickering streetlight, dressed in black, watching us leave. I didn't say a word during the drive. Martinez didn't either, and the silence in the car was unbearable. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that figure following us, but the streets were empty. For the first time in days, I wasn't alone, but I didn't feel any safer. Martinez eventually pulled into the station, and they set me up in a small interview room with a single table and 2 chairs. The walls were that ugly shade of beige that made the whole place feel cold and lifeless. Another officer came in to check on me, but I could tell they were stalling. They had no idea what to do with me. "Just stay here," Martinez said before leaving. "We'll figure this out." Figure this out? They had no idea what they were dealing with. This wasn't some random stalker. Whoever was behind this was always a step ahead, always watching. There wasn't a lock or a cop in the world that could stop them. The interview room was dead quiet, except for the hum of the overhead lights. My phone had been confiscated for evidence, so I didn't even have that to distract me. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, my thoughts spiraling into darker and darker places. What if they couldn't protect me? What if they were already here, waiting for me to let my guard down? Then the door opened. It wasn't Martinez. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The man who stepped in was dressed in a cheap suit, his hair slicked back like he was trying too hard to look professional. Something about him immediately felt off. He sat down across from me, his movements slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. He placed a manila folder on the table but didn't open it. Instead, he just stared at me, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Rough couple of days, huh?" he said, his voice calm and measured. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I'm just here to help," he said. "You've gotten yourself into a bit of a situation." "Help? Who the hell are you?" My patience was gone. I was tired, scared, and angry, and this guy was acting like he knew something I didn't. "You accessed something you shouldn't have," he said, ignoring my question. "The dark web isn't a playground. People like you think you can just poke around and leave without consequences, but now you've got their attention." "Whose attention?" I snapped. He leaned forward, his smile fading. "The people who run this game, the ones who decide who gets to play and who doesn't." I didn't know what to say. This was starting to feel less like a police station and more like the setup for some twisted psychological experiment. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles were white. "You triggered something when you typed in your address," he continued. "That wasn't just a random site. It was a test, and you failed." "Failed?" My voice cracked. "What does that even mean?" "It means you're in their game now, and the only way out is to play." Before I could ask what the hell he was talking about, the door burst open, and Martinez stormed in. He looked furious, his hand already on his gun. "Who the hell let you in here?" he barked at the man. The man in the suit stood up slowly, raising his hands like he didn't want any trouble. "Just giving the kid a heads up," he said with a smirk. "You might want to do the same." Before Martinez could respond, the man walked out, leaving the folder on the table. I reached for it, but Martinez stopped me. "Don't," he said. His tone was firm, almost panicked. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Who was that?" Martinez didn't answer. He just grabbed the folder and shoved it under his arm. "You need to stay here. Don't talk to anyone. Don't touch anything. And for God's sake, don't open that door." He left before I could say another word, locking the door behind him. I was alone again, and the silence was suffocating. My mind was racing. Who was that guy? What did he mean by their game? And why did Martinez seem more scared of him than anything else? I paced the room, trying to make sense of it all, when I noticed something strange. The lights in the room started flickering, just faintly at first, then more violently. The hum of the bulbs grew louder, almost deafening, and then everything went black. The room was plunged into darkness. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear something, a faint scratching sound coming from the corner of the room. My breath caught in my throat as I backed up against the wall, my heart pounding so hard It felt like it might stop. The scratching grew louder, closer, and then it stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, out of the darkness, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have typed your address." I screamed. My hand shot out, searching for the door, the walls, anything to orient myself. The lights flickered back on just as suddenly as they'd gone out. The room was empty, but on the table, where the folder had been, there was now an envelope. It was the same plain white envelope I'd seen before, and I already knew what was inside. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The photo inside wasn't like the others. It wasn't of me sleeping or walking or sitting in the diner. This one was different. It was a picture of me in the interview room, taken just moments ago. And in the corner of the photo, barely visible, was a shadowy figure standing right behind me. I didn't wait for Martinez to come back. I pounded on the door, screaming for someone to let me out. When he finally returned, I shoved the photo in his face, my words tumbling out so fast I could barely breathe. But Martinez didn't react. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he just sighed and said, "It's too late. You're already in." Martinez's words didn't make sense at first. "You're already in?" What the hell did that mean? I was screaming at him, demanding answers, but he just stood there, his face blank, like he'd already given up. The silence that followed was deafening. "Explain it to me," I yelled, grabbing his arm. "What's going on? What am I in?" Martinez didn't meet my eyes. "This isn't something we can stop," he muttered. "It's not just you. It's bigger than you, bigger than me. Once they pick you, it's done." "Who are they?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What do they want?" His eyes finally met mine, and I saw something in them I hadn't expected. Fear. Pure, unfiltered terror. "They don't want anything," he said. "They just watch. And now so will you." Before I could press him further, the door to the interview room slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot, and both of us jumped. Martinez rushed to the door, trying the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Open the door!" he shouted, pounding on it. Then the lights went out again. This time, it wasn't just the room. The entire station went dark. No hum of the lights, no muffled voices from the hallway, just silence. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. The air had changed. It was heavier, colder. And then I heard it. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. "Martinez," I whispered. "What's happening?" But he didn't answer. When the emergency lights flickered on a few seconds later, he was gone. The room was empty. I should have panicked, but instead, I felt nothing. It was like my brain had finally short-circuited. I was beyond fear, beyond anger. All I could do was sit there, staring at the door, waiting for whatever was coming next. And it didn't take long. The door creaked open just a few inches, and a single piece of paper slid through the gap. I didn't want to touch it, but my body moved on its own. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The paper had one sentence written on it. "Return to where it started." I didn't need to ask what that meant. I already knew. The drive back to my apartment felt like walking into my own grave. The streets were eerily quiet, the city itself seeming to hold its breath. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to run, to hide. But there was no point. They'd proven that they could find me anywhere. When I got to the building, the front door was already open, swinging gently in the breeze. I stepped inside, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every other sound. The hallway leading to my apartment was dark, the lights flickering weakly. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the building itself was alive and watching me. When I reached my door, I found another envelope taped to it. This time, I didn't hesitate. I ripped it open right there in the hallway. Inside was another photo, but it wasn't of me. It was of my living room. The photo was taken from the perspective of someone standing in the center of the room, and in the corner, barely visible, was the outline of a person. They were waiting for me. I stepped inside, gripping the knife in my pocket like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The apartment was dark, but I could hear something. Breathing. Slow, steady, coming from the living room. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. No answer. I moved toward the sound, my footsteps feeling impossibly loud on the hardwood floor. The breathing grew louder as I approached, until I was standing in the doorway of the living room. My hand fumbled for the light switch, and when the room flooded with light, I saw them. A man, dressed in black, sitting on my couch like he belonged there. His face was obscured by a mask, simple, featureless, white. His hands were resting on his knees, and he was completely still, like a statue. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. He tilted his head slightly as if considering my question. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. My phone. He held it up, the screen glowing faintly, and tapped a few buttons. A video started playing. It was me, standing in the doorway of my apartment, staring at him. The footage wasn't delayed or pre-recorded. It was live. He was filming me right now from somewhere else in the room. I spun around, searching for the camera, but there was nothing there. No equipment, no second person. Just him, sitting on the couch, holding the phone. "You're not real," I whispered. "This isn't real." But it was. I could feel it. Before I could move, he stood up. Slowly, methodically, like he had all the time in the world. He walked past me, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating off him, and stopped in the doorway. "It's your turn now," he said. His voice was low, distorted, like it was coming through a broken speaker. "They're watching." And then he was gone. Just like that. The room was empty. I don't remember how long I stood there, staring at the spot where he'd been. Eventually I found my phone on the couch right where he'd been sitting. When I picked it up, there was a single new message. "Welcome to the mirror room." That was 3 days ago. Since then, the photos have stopped, the texts have stopped, and everything seems normal. But I know it's not. I see the cameras now, in places I never noticed before. Security lights that blink when I walk by. People who seem just a little too interested in where I'm going. I don't know who they are or what they want. I don't even know if I'm still alive in the way that matters. But one thing is clear, the game isn't over. It's just my turn to play.